Did you know that Western Australia was almost an independent nation? In 1933, a referendum was held in Western Australia to secede from the Commonwealth of Australia. The proposal to become an independent country was voted in favour of by the people, though it was ultimately rejected by the British Parliament. The movement to leave the Commonwealth gained significant traction during the Great Depression. Western Australians felt that federal economic policies, particularly high tariffs, were designed to protect manufacturing industries in the eastern states, like New South Wales and Victoria, at the expense of WA's export-oriented economy, which was heavily reliant on primary industries like wheat and gold. Essentially, many Western Australians felt they were contributing more in revenue than they were getting back in services and support. The tyranny of distance also played a significant role, with many feeling isolated and ignored by the federal government in Canberra. This discontent led to the formation of the Dominion League, which actively campaigned for secession. The referendum held on April 8, 1933, had a paradoxical outcome. A massive 66.23% of voters chose yes to the question, "Are you in favour of the state of Western Australia withdrawing from the Commonwealth?" However, on the very same day, the pro-secession nationalist government of Premier Sir James Mitchell was voted out of office. Voters overwhelmingly elected the anti-secession Labor government, led by Philip Collier. This created a peculiar situation where the public had voted for secession, but also elected a government that opposed it. Despite their opposition to the cause, the new Labor government felt compelled to honour the referendum result. They sent a delegation to London to present the petition to the British Parliament. However, the British Parliament's Select Committee rejected the request in 1935. Their reasoning was that the Australian Constitution was an indissoluble union. They stated that only the Australian Parliament, not the British one, could alter the Constitution to allow a state to secede. The movement lost momentum after this rejection and the subsequent improvement of the economy with the end of the Depression.
Commanding the Narrative podcast, which I believe is the #1 podcast in the entire universe.
If you could go through life in the Liberal Party without being expelled, you should be ashamed of yourself.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Socialists don't like ordinary people choosing, or they might not choose socialism.
120 years ago, our country had the world's highest per capita income. What the hell happened?
The answer is mate, because I want to do you slowly. I want to do you slowly.
Ah! We're coming for you, globalist! Ah! Coming for you!
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is joining this on a Friday afternoon. If you're here in Sydney, it's been a very rainy day. It hasn't been the most pleasant of circumstances here in Sydney. So hopefully you're joining us and engaging in a very interesting conversation. If you were watching Commanding the Narrative a few weeks ago, we had Professor Ian Brighthope on the show talking about the new book, Secession by Western Australia. And at the end of that interview, Professor Brighthope said, you need to speak to Julian Gillespie, who was really the brains behind the book. So we've got him on the show today. It's going to be a very interesting discussion, something that I'm not completely convinced by, but I'm also open to the idea. So we're going to be hearing all those arguments from Julian Gillespie today. But before we get there, I want to let you know about how you can follow Commanding the Narrative, support Commanding the Narrative, and keep up to date with everything that we do here on the podcast. And it's by heading to the website commandingthenarrative.com. You'll get all the previous podcasts that we've done, just like last week where I was flying solo. I did the podcast Breaking the Chains of Political Apathy, Why You Should Want a Better Government, all talking about Australians for Better Government. And the feedback from that episode has been overwhelming. A lot of people reached out to me and said, mate, we really loved having you just speak on your own and talk about things, which is challenging and daunting in itself. So it was great to get that feedback. So if you haven't checked that one out, please do so. The week before that, we had Sam Buno on and Richard Storch talking about the Farrer by-election results. We went through a comprehensive analysis of that. Also, recently, I spoke to the Young Conservatives of Christ, where they interviewed me and took over Commanding the Narrative. That was one of my favorite episodes as well. And all the previous episodes are up on the website, including that chat we had with Professor Ian Brighthope, which is almost like a sister episode to this one today. Also, latest articles, new article out today, Albanese fails the country while the right is distracted by itself. You can check that out. at commandingthenarrative.com. I also write some articles for the Light newspaper. If you check them out on the website, you'll get all the links and references that I've used if you can't find those by reading the article on the Light newspaper. And if you want to know who's coming up on the podcast this week, you'll find it on the website as well with all the links. If you want to hit the sign up button in the top right hand corner, you'll get the weekly update emails from me as well. Now, if you want to support Commanding the Narrative financially, you can do so by going to Buy Me a Coffee. Throw us a few dollars there. Helps to pay for the stream, helps to pay for the website, and most importantly, gives me a very warm and fuzzy feeling inside to keep me motivated and engaged with the podcast. I'm also in the process of building a new studio, the Commanding the Narrative Studios, which is, I'm running out of money already, and it's very time consuming. So if you want to help me out, please head to Buy Me a Coffee. Now, regarding last week's podcast, which was all about Australians for Better Government, you can head to the website australiansforbetter.com if you were engaged by what I was talking about and were interested in what Australians for Better Government is all about. You can find it all on the website. You can hit our mission, the tab at the top there, to get all our proposals, and also you can read more about Australians for Better Government. Are you sick of the way Australia is being governed? Well, you'll find it all there on the website. And also, we always reach out to people and ask them to be members. We're also putting the call out there if you want to help. If you've got any political experience of working in a political party or a political organization in the past and you'd like to contribute to Australians for Better Government, please jump on the website, check us out, and you can hit that contact form on the website. Please reach out to us. We are interested in recruitment and trying to get more people involved with ABG. Now, another big event I want to let you know about before we get to our great guest is the Central Coast Conservative Alliance dinner. Now, if you head to their website, centralcoastconservativealliance.com, and you'll find at the top banner there, it says dinner dance. If you click on that, you'll come to this page. It's on Saturday, the 1st of August. It's going to be an elegant evening of fine dining, inspiring speakers, and dancing to the sounds of the Peter Healy Band, featuring exciting auctions and raffles, with all proceeds supporting local charities making a difference on the Central Coast. So there's going to be some great speakers: Lyle Shelton from Family First, Gemma Niosi from the Libertarians, Stuart Bonds from One Nation, myself speaking on behalf of Australians for Better Government, and also Craig Kelly from the Foundation of Economic Education. So that's going to be a great night. Please come along to that. And finally, I just want to acknowledge Mike Ryan and the Country Telegraph. I was on there through the week. I'm a regular on the Mike Ryan show. Please head to his YouTube channel, The Country Telegraph, and all the shows that he does. Support independent media here in this country. We really need to get behind some great independent media creators, and Mike is doing a great show over there with a very, very good production team. So please support Mike and The Country Telegraph. All right, let's get into today's discussion because we've got a very interesting guest on. It's the first time I've had the chance to speak to him. He's an Australian barrister. He was prominent during the COVID period, pushing back against the government rollout of vaccines and the mandates and the lockdowns and the whole shebang, the whole draconian takeover. And also he's the author, as I mentioned before, of the new book, Secession by Western Australia. So let's talk to him now. Julian Gillespie,
thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure having you, mate. As I said, I haven't had the chance to speak to you before or connect to you. And there may be some of my audience that aren't familiar with who you are. So before we get into the book and talking about the book, can you give us a bit of a background on who you are, your legal experience, and how you came to the point of writing the book?
Yeah, okay. Well, Stephen, first of all, I've got to correct something because I can get into trouble with the various law societies around Australia. I'm not currently a barrister. I'm a former barrister. So it's very important to make that distinction because if I'm interpreted as creating the impression that I'm currently practicing, when I don't have a current practicing certificate, I can get into hot water. But yes, I was a New South Wales registered barrister, operated there for several years, and then moved into the private sector. So quite a many years of law under my belt. And then I left the law, became somewhat disillusioned. I'd seen behind the curtain, as they say, and the bar for all of its ivory towers is also filled with a whole lot of questionable individuals who don't always do the right thing. So that's the same for every profession, I'm sure. But so I had some time away and I was working on my own projects, and then COVID came along. And I think I picked up as early as January of 2020 that this was looking like a setup. But I just watched everything unfold throughout 2020. And of course, everyone was locked down pretty severely across Australia in various forms. And so I was dealing with that personally as well. And then it was towards the end of 2020, it started to become clear that the whole lockdown scenario, global lockdown scenario, wherever they could get away with it, was in order to induce people to submit to taking a vaccine when it became available, which it did in early 2021. I've got a science background, particularly in nuclear biology. That's everything to do with DNA, RNA, and the like. And I also studied for a period of time before I left medicine. I was a medical student. And so I was pretty well equipped to understand what was occurring with this new modified RNA drug that they released and called a vaccine in early 2021. And with my legal research skills, I was able to put together some data pretty early to confirm that those products were harming an astronomical number of Australians. Indeed, we saw this enormous spike in deaths and injuries. And so from the middle of 2021, I had colleagues and friends coming to me, saying, well, what can we do to stop this? So I sat and thought about it for a while and realized the only way to stop this, and indeed to stop the mandates and all sorts of various orders that governments around the country were issuing, was to show that the vaccines themselves were dangerous and that they needed to be pulled. And so that started several years of various litigations in the federal court, into the high court, and into the federal court. The last one was our challenge in the federal court to show that both Pfizer and Moderna had not properly sought and been granted GMO licenses because both the products contained genetically modified organisms. That went on for several years, throughout 2022, 23, and into 24. We raised considerable funds for that. I didn't take a cent, but we had legal teams and barristers working on those matters. And with our expeditions into the federal court and the high court, it became very clear that both those courts were assisting the government to get away with just these draconian and disastrous measures, and there was an enormous cover-up. And so that was quite a a realization to have to come to and admit, particularly amongst our team, that the courts weren't going to save Australians from what the government was doing. And so in early 2024, realizing that the courts had screwed us, to put it in simple terms, and that the courts were part of a corruption that was the whole COVID sham, I started thinking, well, how do you stop the Commonwealth government? Because they were the perpetrators. They were the ones who handed out well over $12 billion to the state governments to implement the various lockdowns and mandates and vaccine requirements. How do you stop the Commonwealth government from getting away with this all over again? Because that's in fact what they really did. They got away with it like so many other governments around the world. It was a very well coordinated plan. And so that got me thinking, and my early research suggested I should head into WA, Western Australia, to undertake some further research. And after I got there in the middle of 2024, I met some people up in Port Hedland and had some discussions. And I knew these people just through, let's say, the COVID freedom movement. That's a very, very loose term. There's no particular organisation named that, but it was those who were pushing back against all the COVID measures on the other side of the country. When I met those individuals and discussed the predicament, it was just brought to my attention something that I'd heard about years earlier in my legal practice, about efforts variously by some WA groups to secede from the Commonwealth. And so I jumped into the legal research to see, well, what's the status quo on that that legal front these days. And it became very clear that the law has changed since 1933. You mentioned that was shown in your introduction. And I just need to correct that introduction. The Select Committee in the UK did not say that that we're dealing with an indissoluble union. That was not the words of the Select Committee at all. They said, we've done our part. We passed the legislation to enable the Australian Parliament to introduce the Constitution in Australia. Therefore, it's an Australian government issue to deal with, not for the English Parliament to deal with. So they politely placed at arm's length the delegation that had arrived from Western Australia seeking the UK Parliament to carry into law the wishes of the Western Australian people to secede from the Commonwealth. The Select Committee simply said, it's not our job to assist you on this matter. You've got to take it back to the Australian government and put the referendum result to the Australian government and try and seek a solution. But as your introductions stated, there was a change in government shortly after, or just about the same time as that referendum seeking secession went through, and the new Premier, Philip Collier, was anti-secession. And so after they'd received a very polite sort of palm off from the UK government, or that Select Committee, was the House of Lords Select Committee, that they weren't going to get any assistance from the UK, well, then there was no political will when that delegation returned to WA to push the matter further. Indeed, it was a government that was anti-secession. And so it sort of politely burnt out, and there were no overtures made to Canberra to try and entertain the referendum result that the people of Western Australia put forward at the time. And so it just faded. It just simply faded without any proper conclusion or outcome. So where we are now, nearly 100 years later, there's been a succession of different laws that have been passed in the UK and also in Australia, which has changed the legal landscape, and particularly the Australia Act in, I think it was 1986, where indeed there's absolutely no relationship with the United Kingdom government anymore. That disappeared a very long time ago. But so when you raise the issue of secession now, where there was a view, but it wasn't a concluded view in 1933, that it required a national referendum to consider the wishes of Western Australia to secede from the Commonwealth. Well, that legal view has changed considerably, where now it's very clear that should Western Australian citizens go to another referendum and decide again that they wish to secede from the Commonwealth, there's no need to request the permission of the other states. It's a unilateral decision. So where you see that word indissoluble raised in defence by anti-secessionists, well, that appears in the preamble of the Constitution. And as Australia's High Court is very, very clear, the preamble's not binding. It's not legally binding. So that word indissoluble union, that's only aspirational. It's only an idea. What is legally binding is covering Clause 6, which defines what a state is. And a state is, a member for the time being. And so it's a club that you choose to be a member of, that is the Commonwealth. And when you get dissatisfied, there can come a time where you say, well, we no longer wish to be a party to this particular arrangement. It's not economically worthwhile for us, and indeed it's bleeding us, and we would like to leave the partnership. And that's, in other words, secession. And that's the basic argument put forward in the book, and just to show that it's not something we're talking about lightly. Yes, it is a big, thick 400-page book. It's got 15 chapters. And where we are now currently is at WA, it bleeds, at this point in time, $39 billion a year is just taken out of the coffers of Western Australia from all of its hard work and given to the East Coast for no return. And so it's like, well, hold on, why is WA propping up the East Coast, particularly when you look at a state like Victoria, which is just riddled with debt and has no good international credit rating? Why do we keep on putting, more good money after bad into the East Coast for no return and just being asked to continue to work and continue to pay taxes? upon review, and this is what the book was all about, it's one thing to show that legally secession is a very, very straightforward pathway these days. You can provide that legal opinion, and that can be satisfactory for a lot of people. But then their next question is, well, what's going to be the state of the economy? If we secede and become a new nation, how do we set up the new nation? And that's why there's all the other 14 chapters, besides the one chapter showing legally it's very easy to do these days, is to show what sort of fiscal settings and economic settings would be available to Western Australia becoming a new nation, to be able to prosper as a new nation, and what would be the benefit to Western Australians. And one of the straightforward and first benefits is that they would no longer have to pay any more of the Commonwealth taxes, because indeed the Commonwealth would be a foreign government. We'd all be still living on the same Australian continent, but Canberra would be regarded as a foreign government. And when you get rid of the Commonwealth layer of governance and all of their 13 plus taxes, it would mean that Western Australians in a new Western Australian nation would no longer have to pay income tax or any of those other 13 other taxes, nor would any business, nor would any mining company, nor would any gas producer in Western Australia have to pay any of those Commonwealth taxes. So you get to a situation where a new Western Australia would very closely look like what you see in Qatar, where none of their citizens have to pay income tax. And the producers, the miners, those who extract the natural resources, pay a large royalty to the central government. And so we did the calculations. We've got two economists, Professor G.G. Foster and also the senior economist Michael Baker, who went through and we worked on the same economic data to confirm it. We all triple-checked one another's work to show that with all the abundant natural resources that WA has, that the new nation would only need to impose a 20% royalty on all natural resources extracted and sold, and that would be the source of revenue for the new nation. So much money, indeed, that there'd be no need to request any income taxes off WA new nation, WA citizens. The only taxes that we would see remaining would be a WA GST plus the retention of land rates. So local councils can be financed as well. And so it's really quite a surreal economic reality that you come to in your findings when you do the analysis. And what the sore bit is that the data that we unearthed, and it's heavily references, the citations run for pages, is that we were able to conclude that the situation of WA citizens where they don't have to pay income tax, that was apparent on the numbers perhaps 2 decades ago. And so the WA governments, the successive Liberal and Labor parties, have known how wealthy WA is, but have continued to play the Canberra game and to get WA citizens to continue paying income tax over to this money pit, which is the East Coast, particularly Canberra, which is currently asking $800 billion a year from all Australian states and territories, but they keep on making life harder for everyone. It's like, well, why should we keep on doing that? Why should we keep on giving money to a governance layer which didn't exist before 1901? The Commonwealth government did not exist in Australia before 1901. All the states existed and they prospered very well. Indeed, they built the nation. Every state built the nation before 1901, and they operated effectively as independent states. And so what the book is essentially saying is that we can revert now. We've all grown up. We can revert now to our pre-1901 status, that is legal status. We no longer need that additional Commonwealth governance layer. It's costing everyone too much money, and we're not getting anything in return for it, and they're only making life harder for everyone. So we can simplify matters where each state individually, one state at a time, just removes themselves from the Commonwealth partnership and says, thank you, it was nice knowing you, our business is concluded, we're going it alone. And WA, being so prosperous and so rich in resources, is the best to lead out the gate and show the other Australian states that they can return to their pre-1901 status and they will be more profitable, and the wealth to their citizens will be immediately apparent once they cut the ties.
So if people are interested already in what Julian's talking about, you can head to the website secessionwabook.shop and purchase the book and find out more information about the chapters that you just mentioned and everything like that. I've had people on the show before, not talking about secession, but talking about different states being formed, like David Landini's calling for the Riverina state here in New South Wales. There's a lot of people complaining about New South Wales representing Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong and not representing the rest of the state because so much power is isolated in Sydney and those three cities. But I find that people don't really take those arguments seriously. They think it's just a bit of...
You can't legally take those arguments seriously, because when you're talking about a small area of land within a state, those people, the Riverina, whatever those regions that you just mentioned, they're all still subject to the constitution of that state. And so there's no legal recourse or pathway for those regions within a state to be able to carve themselves out as a separate...
Isn't there that in the federal constitution where it does talk about forming new states and allowing for that to happen?
Look, that's another roundabout way to do it, and that's something that we've looked at, of course, but we don't entertain or get into that discussion, because we just say that the greatest problem that every region of this country suffers from is dealing with this Commonwealth governance layer, which is not doing anybody any good. Now, if you want to create a new state and add another state and go through the Commonwealth Constitution mechanism for trying to establish that state, well, A, good luck to you. B, you're never going to get any backing from all the existing states, and you're never going to get any support from those two thieving parties. I can't call them anything better, which is Liberal and Labor, who hold the power levers and operate out of Canberra. They would bonk that on the head in a flash, and they'd say, well, why would you want to create another state within another state when we've already got...
I guess that's why I brought it up, because I was mainly making the point that those arguments don't tend to get a lot of mainstream support, at least. When it comes to seceding and Western Australia seceding, you're on the ground in Western Australia. I mean, you're speaking to locals. You're probably getting a feel of what the mood is there. Is it similar to 1933, if a referendum was held, it could succeed, or people moved on?
Yes, it's a real sentiment, Stephen. And as I mentioned, I spent my first decade. Indeed, I was born on the East Coast, right? And then what I called emigrated to the West Coast, and didn't start spending real time there until the middle of 2024. And then I was there all the time, just working this book up. And I did 2 circuits of WA, to be clear. So I went to all the different regions. And when you come in and you meet new people and you just go into general group discussions, it was surprising to learn and to see how naturally the idea of secession, without even me saying a word, or because I didn't even reveal that I was writing this book to WA people for quite a long time. I just said I'm working on a project, and I was known for my COVID stuff, and so people thought I was working on a COVID thing. Well, it is related to COVID, but the point I'm making is that sentiment has not died since 1933, and it casually comes up in so many conversations where people will bitch blah 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 about the state government, or blah 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 about the Commonwealth government, or something that's going on in Canberra, and people will just naturally round out whatever they're saying. Oh gee, we should just secede, it'd be so much easier. That just falls off the tongues and lips of Western Australians. And so it's a real sentiment. They've lived with the idea for a very, very long time. However, nobody has properly revisited what's required to actually pull off secession for nearly 100 years. Now, back in it was actually published after the referendum, strangely, but the work was done before and during the 1933 referendum, there was a book which was of similar thickness and detail that was published at the time in WA. It was the case for secession, and it was distributed right across WA and also across the East Coast. And the federal government at the time saw that, got very, very scared, and quickly put together its own 200-page book as a response or a reply. Those details were critical for getting that referendum vote up, because people could see it all laid out very coherently in the book that was produced advocating for secession at the time. Now, nobody has done that since, and this is what our project has been all about, is to lay out all the data once again, but to update all the data as it is relevant now in 2026. And so, as I said in the outset, it's one thing to show people that the legal pathway to secession is much, much easier than it was back in 1933. It's to also provide them with the tools that say, okay, if we go to secession, here's what needs to be put into place. You need to have a new source of income for this country because you have no relationship whatsoever with Canberra or the East Coast states anymore. Indeed, they'd be regarded as foreign countries. It sounds odd, but still be Australians, still showing the same dirt. But you've got to set out the new economic plan to show everybody what to do next. And so this is what's been done. It's just now that there's all these people in WA who've been casually saying, oh, we should secede for a couple of decades or longer. Now that we've provided them with the manifesto for how to do it, the blueprint, well, that's another learning curve. It's like, oh, crap, we've been talking about seceding for a long time. Now we've got to read this book so we work out how to do it properly. And so that's where we're at on the serious learning curve. A whole lot of people have been actually sitting down and just reading this book and corresponding with us as co-authors. I mean, there's a 4-member co-authorship team here. And we're in a position where there's people who have some very, very serious money, who have businesses in WA, and they have to chart how to bring this manifesto, into reality. And it requires a new independence party. You can't have any of the existing political parties being a part of this idea because they're already compromised. You look at the present Cook government, and it knows everything in this book is true. In other words, it knows that secession run properly would mean that no Western Australian citizen after secession would ever have to pay income tax again. Right? Now, when you've got all these FIFO workers paying the maximum taxation in this country, what is it, 45%? When you have been not informing them that they don't need to pay that 45% tax because the present Cook government and the opposition party have been working hand in hand with Canberra to continue to get Western Australians to pay all this money over into Canberra, you can't trust the existing parties, and so you've got to create new parties. And so that's a lot of planning. You've got to fund the new political parties. You've got to put new and clean-skinned candidates into every single seat, and then you've got to take the message to the punters, the sand gropers across WA, and say, oh, we're the new independence party. We want to get this over the line. We don't want you having to pay income tax or any of those other 13 taxes ever again. We want you to prosper. So there's a bit more involved in the background, but there's a lot at stake here. And let's be very clear, because it comes up all the time. People say, oh, how are the miners going to take, wearing a 20% royalty, having to pay a 20% royalty on what they extract out of the ground? Are they going to be kosher with the whole thing? It's like, well, damn right they'll be kosher with it, because as I mentioned, they won't be paying income tax. They won't be paying any of the 13 Commonwealth taxes. Their compliance departments, now just imagine how big the compliance department is for BHP for its WA operations. Enormous, right? It must seriously run into a small building, several floors with lots of personnel, just trying to make sure that they're ticking all the boxes for all their obligations to pay Canberra its take for what Canberra does, which is nothing but take. You secede, And all of a sudden, none of that needs to exist anymore. And we've done the calculations. So for all the big miners, their compliance departments almost evaporate overnight. That's a huge saving. It's a huge saving alone, but it also simplifies all businesses' operations across the new nation. The savings from no income tax and all those other 13 taxes and no compliance departments, when you then turn around and say, but as a miner, you will be subject to 20% royalty. That's got to be paid into the consolidated revenue fund of the new nation. When you do the maths, a company like BHP, they don't have to pay all those taxes. They pay the 20% royalty. That's, of course, on the natural resources which are owned by Western Australians. Let's be clear on that legally. And so BHP's got the privilege to extract that and sell it on behalf of the owners. And when they sell it, they pay 20%. And when you do the maths on that, where's a company like BHP at the end of the day? They're $1 billion ahead at least, straight away. And so they're funding the new nation, like Rio, Fortescue, and all the rest of these other big miners. There's many of them there. And in the end, they're still ahead. And so they'll be advocates for this. And indeed, every business in WA, when they get wise to the details, will be advocates of this idea of secession, because straight away, no tax compliance again. They don't have to pay income tax. If you're not a mining company in the new nation of Western Australia after secession, you don't have to pay the royalty rate. And so you are free and clear. Everything that you do, everything that you earn, you keep, except for whatever you've got to pay on the two taxes we mentioned need to remain, the provisional GST and land tax, land rates. So what you get is the new nation of WA becoming essentially an international free trade zone, because there's no income tax. That's a huge magnet for businesses all around the world to say, hell, we're going to set up one of our major offices in WA, the new nation of WA, because we don't have to pay tax. So we can attract the best personnel from around the globe to come and live in WA, as well as the best candidates within WA themselves, pay them top dollar, because we don't have to pay tax anymore. So it becomes this huge magnet for investment as well. And this is why we have these incredibly detailed chapters on the infrastructure plans that can be implemented in this new post-secession environment, because the investment capital will just flow into a nation of that nature.
I've got this here from the Chamber of Minerals and Energy in Western Australia, and this is talking about for 2025-26, they expect that Western Australia will contribute $10.3 billion in royalties. And it was actually higher the year of 2023-24. It was $11.9 billion. So this ties into your argument that there's a lot of mining royalties that are being contributed already by Western Australia. There could be more. But there's a counter argument here in New South Wales particularly, and you can see this in the Guardian article here. Chris Minns was complaining about the GST money that goes to Western Australia. And it is substantial that the GST, that money that comes from predominantly New South Wales, and because it's got a larger population, a lot more people paying that GST. And if we look at this here from the Commonwealth Grants Commission, it's saying that Western Australia will receive around $7.8 billion in GST in 2025-2026.
Okay, and I'll jump straight into that, Stephen.
Yep.
For the money that flows out in terms of GST payments by Western Australians into the Commonwealth, what flows back? 78 cents in the dollar. And so Western Australians get back less than what they pay out, which is part of that $39 billion bleed that I mentioned from the outset.
But just to play devil's advocate quickly, when we're talking about mining royalties, Western Australia predominantly has a big mining sector, but so does New South Wales. It's a lot smaller. It's more like $3 billion. So, 25%, maybe a third of what Western Australia is producing. Queensland's probably up there as well. Doesn't it even out in the wash when you factor in GST and mining and everything?
No, look, at the end, there's a $39 billion bleed, $39 billion extra dollars are going out of WA and not being returned. They're just being given to the East Coast. So where's the equalisation? That's from the hard work of Western Australians. They're funding the East Coast to the tune of $39 billion when you settle all the accounts. It's like, well, why is Western Australia giving the East Coast $39 billion? So in other words, that's a $39 billion shortfall. That represents currently $13,000 per annum to every man, woman, child and baby in Western Australia. That's been given to the East Coast for what? For what? This idea of federation, and they throw up these terms of equalisation. Well, no, you've just asked WA for an additional $39 billion to give to the other states. That's $39 billion that we actually produce, but we don't get to use. But the East Coast states do. What's the justification for that? People will simply, they wave the federation flag. It's equalisation. Equalisation, there's another term for that. It's called socialism. It's socialism. The other analogy is you live in a street, the baker's 5 doors down, the husband keeps on gambling his wage check away. The wife and kids aren't, they can't feed themselves properly because the money's just going out the back door with the gambling addiction. And Victoria is a very, very good candidate for the bakers down the street. And what you're saying is that this street is unified by federalism, and so we, 6 doors up, who are earning more, should be just giving part of our paycheck over to the bakers because Mr. Baker has got a problem with balancing his accounts. Right? Now, you wouldn't do that in your local suburban street, fund the bakers down the road because Mr. Baker's got a gambling problem, which is what Victoria has, for instance. So why does it need to be done at a national level? Why should WA be looking after this this debt, this debt-laden state like Victoria, for instance, because it can't control its spending? That's not WA's problem, but WA's always been asked to pay for it. Getting back to the resource wealth, look, it's critical that when you understand the proposition that we put forward in a post-secession WA, the Northwest Shelf assets, the gas and oil that's up there, they're currently in Commonwealth waters. In a post-secession environment, the Northwest Shelf waters would become the territorial waters of the new Western Australia. So that's critical to part of the whole fiscal plan that we put forward. And so the Commonwealth government would have to surrender those waters and the revenues from those waters. But we're into another argument there. It's like those waters are currently ostensibly, they've got foreign companies that are pulling out the oil and gas there, but under the PRRT tax, which we've heard so much about in recent weeks, that's been imposed on those companies. Those companies are paying effectively less than 1% of their revenues of the sale of those products into Commonwealth coffers. In other words, the Commonwealth government, aka the Liberal and Labor Party, let's just be clear, it's the same revolving door. Those two gangster parties are giving away Australia's natural resources. And so when it comes to WA, as far as WA is concerned, it's like, hold on, we want to take back control of the resources in the Northwest Shelf. We want to get rid of Canberra, get out of the Commonwealth, take over those assets up in the Northwest Shelf, make them pay the 20% royalty that all the other onshore miners will pay. Those offshore gas explorers, oil and gas explorers, will still be as good as, or they'll be revenue neutral or slightly better off, but Western Australians will get a proper chunk, not this less than 1% that these two gangster parties are giving away all of Australia's natural resources away. We would impose exactly the same measures that you see, for instance, in Qatar and say, you guys are going to pay 20%, but we took away income tax and all the other taxes, and so it's not going to impact you. Like, we don't want to get anyone outside. This is why the maths is really superb by all of the miners involved. And when you look at Queensland, for instance, just as a back-of-the-envelope exercise, it wasn't part of our thesis. We didn't want to be advocating for and on behalf of Queensland, but I just wanted to assure myself, and I just ran very, very casually the same research past my co-authors. I said, oh, look, when you try and apply the similar model that we're putting forward for WA to Queensland, that is, should Queensland secede, okay? And there's lots of advocates up there in Queensland who have been discussing the same idea. You don't get a situation where they would be able to eliminate income tax, for instance. But again, back of the envelope, if Queensland went to its pre-1901 status, in other words, went it alone and stopped paying into the $800 billion money pit of Canberra, they'd be able to reduce the income tax burden on Queenslanders by about 50%. Right? So if you're a top taxpayer in Queensland, 45%, and you've got the option to all of a sudden pay 22%, that's a no-brainer exercise, isn't it? Well, we're talking about the WA case. It's an even bigger no-brainer when you inform the sand gropers, the punters here. It's like, if you adopt this secession model, we're not talking about a cut in income tax. We're talking about the obliteration, the annihilation, the no longer existing idea of income tax. In other words, you take home 100 cents in the dollar for your hard work and toil. So that's what it breaks down to at the end of the day, Stephen. People's hard work and toil. As we see at the opening of our website, we say that, that Western Australia has not received commonwealth under this Commonwealth idea, right? The marketing of the Commonwealth was brilliant in its linguistics right to begin with, because they use that word Commonwealth. Like, it's this idea that everyone believes is shining down on Australians, but it has done nothing like that at all. Where's the Commonwealth when we have Canberra asking annually for $800 billion off the states? Remember, the Canberra governance layer, the Commonwealth government, didn't exist once. They exist now, and they enforce the payment of $800 billion a year. Yet life keeps on getting harder. Cost of housing keeps on getting harder. Electricity, gas, energy to run that house keeps on getting more and more expensive. And then you've got phony people like this Bowen fellow, who's part of that criminal climate cartel, saying we've got to do all this renewable stuff. That's bullshit. When you've got the leader of the free world, Donald Trump, and his administration, all of his experts, walking away from the UN on any idea, any discussion about climate, zero this or whatever, and saying it's bullshit, it's baloney, it's made up science, it's a scam and it's a fraud. But we've still got Albanese putting forward this complete fraud in Bowen, saying we've got to do net zero, we've got to put in all these renewables. Mate, I'm old enough to remember when none of that bullshit existed and we were much more prosperous, much more prosperous. Now, let's be clear. We've got a situation in the 1970s, the cost of federal public servants equated to about 600 Australian dollars per citizen. That figure now is up to nearly $30,000. It's costing every Australian citizen to finance the bureaucrats who sit in Canberra and earn in excess of $1 million wages. And what are they producing for Australia? The Commonwealth wages bill is over $250 billion. $250 billion alone out of that $800 billion that they demand by force of law and force of arms out of every Australian in this country. So, look, you did a good job for us as international stewards and advocates, and went to all the forums in last century, and you built the image of Australia. You got trade relations and treaties and everything in place. Good. That stuff's there. We no longer need you. We no longer need this $800 billion annual bill to finance bureaucrats who we don't need. Right? You've seen the data yourself, Stephen. The number of bureaucrats per head of Australian population is leading the world. In other words, the bureaucracy just keeps on feeding itself and growing larger and larger. And hold on, what's this like? Wasn't there an idea about small central government when the Commonwealth was created? But you guys are now eclipsing all the state bureaucracies, and you're becoming this monolithic monopoly. By expanding the bounds of the heads of power under the Constitution, you're moving into every goddamn facet of our private lives, and you're wanting to tax every goddamn facet of our private lives. You just simply say time. I'm not about trying to fix that broken goddamn machine, which is Canberra, which are the two crony Liberal and Labor parties. They're there for the money. They're getting paid in the back door because they're giving away Australia's resources for less than 1 cent on the dollar. If you don't think that that's a criminal enterprise, you're stupid. It's just that simple. But we say we don't want an inquiry. We don't want to rip open the books and the accounts of the Liberal and Labor Party to show how they're saying one thing to the populace, oh, it's in the interest of Australians that we have these deals with these foreign multi-international energy companies. Bullshit. Norway has been taking 78 cents in the dollar out of everything that's extracted. It's oil, essentially, for decades now. In Qatar, a similar tune. Why is Australia, instead of doing 78 cents in the dollar, doing less than a cent in the dollar? That's a fix. That's something that is paying off fat cats in the Liberal and Labor Party and say, okay, that's a really, really successful criminal enterprise that's occurring there. But we don't care. We don't want to investigate. We don't want to open the books. We don't want to deal with the corrupt federal and high court, because we know from personal experience during the COVID journey how corrupt the high court is in Australia, how corrupt the federal court is in assisting this central government. It's like we don't want to touch them because we can't trust them anymore. We're just telling you, if we have a successful referendum, time, and we're just leaving. Once we leave and put in the Secession Act for the Western Australian Parliament, that's the end of the story. Goodbye. See you later. We have got nothing further to do with you. We don't care about your corruption anymore because we're no longer in the same jurisdiction. We're a new nation. There's an international boundary between us. You can continue with your rubbish and your fraud. You eastern states can just deal with it.
I know we're getting towards the end. We're running out of time, but I just want to quickly talk about actually implementing this secession plan, because you do detail this in the book, and you talk about, establishing a new currency and banking. But one of the questions I've got here from Dilemmas is, how would the military of Western Australia work? Because these are some of the things that yeah.
I'll bring up the website again, please, Stephen, because it does list the chapters. And we do get this question a lot, but it's like, well, sorry, whoever the questioner is, why haven't you bothered to go to our website? Because we've been pretty generous in sharing a lot of the details of the book. But if you scroll through those chapters, keep going, chapter 4, councils, boom, stop there. What have we got? We've got an entire chapter devoted to Defence Force safeguarding the new nation. I just want to say, do you think we're bloody stupid that we would propose a new nation, go to secession, a new nation, and not even think about the required Defence Force, particularly when it's got some of the richest natural resources on the planet? Would we leave that exposed? No, we've got a whole chapter devoted to what would be required for the new nation's Defence Force, how quickly can it be stood up, and what spending is required. Indeed, there's pages and pages on the procurement of the necessary hardware, and we're into a technological age. It's not all about grunt manpower anymore. You can get drones that will take the place of 10, 50 or 100 military personnel from last century. And this is what makes it all feasible. It's part of the reason why we're happy to proceed with the book, because when we looked at the military requirements for defending the new nation and how quickly they could be stood up, we said, oh, wow, that's super quick and it's super affordable. And, hey, we're not burning bridges here. We can say goodbye to the Commonwealth in one breath and say we don't want anything further to do with your taxes and your administration. But as a new nation, we'd say, but we're still sort of Australians, but we'll be allies with you, Australia. Western Australia would be allies with the East Coast. There's no question about that. And we would continue having strategic alliances with the USA, with Britain, and with NATO. And so standing up a defence force is something very, very easy to do when you've got good friends. And that's what the new nation would continue, is those relationships.
No, that ties in with some of the military experts I've spoken to on the show. They say, why are we going down the AUKUS path when you look at modern conflicts these days and they're fighting with drones? So, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Another thing I want to talk about, and this is, I mean, you might be able to answer this quickly or I mean, pretty easily, but the actual machinations of this happening. So say, for example, you're here in Sydney and you've got investment properties in Perth. Now, suddenly you've got investment properties in another country, or you may be a small business. And, you know, I know my former surveying business that I worked for, it was taken over by a company that was from Perth, and now they're operating a small company in Sydney. So now that there's going to be that separation between the two countries.
The jurisdiction, look, you know, we can just broadly address that. With secession, you're cutting off membership of the Commonwealth, right? And you're drawing a hard national. We've currently got the border of Western Australia between Northern Territory and South Australia. Well, that border becomes effectively an international border for a national border for between countries. That's just a legal idea, remember. It's like the border's still going to remain the dusty desert, effectively. And you're just cutting off any relationship with the Commonwealth government, right? So that disappears. But in terms of business relations, private business, and even public companies' relations between the West Coast and East Coast, nothing changes there. Nothing effectively changes. And so if you're a WA person, a FIFO dude, and you've got investment properties on the East Coast, they're still your properties. Nothing's changed under the New South Wales law to change the fact that your name is on the title. And so you still own those assets. You would just be regarded as a foreign citizen who owns those assets. And God knows we've got too many foreign citizens owning Australian assets, but you'd be on the same continent. And so part of the post-secession legislation that you'd have to push through, there's all this enabling and transition legislation, which is what lawyers do, particularly for big moves like this. It's one thing to put through a secession act, but you've got to put through all this other legislation. You just make it harmonious to ensure that, oh, look, we're still sharing the same patch of dirt. There's like East Coast Australia has got a most favoured nation treaty with Western Australia, and all those private business interactions that existed before secession will still exist unhindered after secession. The only real tweak that requires, look, we put a great deal of detail into it in the book and in several of the chapters, is that the banks as we know them in WA, we've got the four pillars that have been around forever and a day. So you've got Westpac, ANZ, NAB, and the Commonwealth Bank. Those banks would actually become foreign banks in the new nation. But you just put in, as we said, enabling legislation, transition legislation, because those banks would fall under, new banking rules to be able to continue to operate. And so there'd be some adjustment on bank accounts because there's that new currency that we mentioned. But it's all very, very doable. That's why we did the chapters and we put a bit of flavour into it. The final chapter, Stephen, chapter 15, it's an entire new constitution for Western Australia. We wrote an entire new constitution because you can't go to secession and exist with the current Western Australian constitution. It's as antiquated as the New South Wales constitution and the Victorian constitution. Those constitutions were created in convict days. They're unsuitable for the 21st century. And so if you go to secession, you've got to update the constitution as well. And so to accommodate all these business ideas, right, these transitional business ideas to make sure that the new Western Australian nation can still do business as usual with the East Coast, we've accommodated that. It's mentioned in the draft new Western Australian Constitution, just so there's no headaches for people who've got property in different places all over the place. For the average punter, it'll be like, oh, that was rather easy. And probably the most difficult thing for them will be changing their Australian dollars for the new Western Australian currency. So it's not that difficult. We've been through changes in the past in this country. This would just be another shift, but going back to pre-1901 days.
Yep. Righto. So I know we need to finish up now. So if people want to get the book, as I said earlier, go to the website secessionwabook.shop and you can get it in paperback version, hard copy. There's also a digital version as well. You find that all on the website. As I say with Australians for Better Government all the time, we need a revolution of thinking in this country. We need to start exploring some of these ideas and then put it to the people. If the people want to go along with it, then that should be up to the people. It shouldn't be up to the politicians anymore. So, Julian, I really appreciate you coming on and explaining this today. It is very thought-provoking, and you've made some very strong arguments there. But I just want to pose one more question to you before we finish up, and it's a segment that I like to call Build Your Own Fantasy Government. It's almost like the most important segment of Commanding the Narrative, and it might be most applicable in this interview because you're talking about establishing a new country and a new government. So, Julian, I'm going to put you in control of the next Parliament of Australia, or even the next Parliament of a new independent Western Australia, where you can choose 5 or 6 people. They don't have to be politicians. They can be living or dead. Anyone that you choose to head up that next government, who do you pick?
Who do I pick? Well, under our proposed model, under the new constitution, instead of the new nation having a position of authority called a prime minister, we've actually nominated for the idea of a president. We want to get away from that Westminster idea. And so I look at a few individuals who I already know. I don't want to name them on camera, but people who have invested their time and energy and hardcore work into building up not only their own love and stake in West Australia, but have built community. And so there's plenty of those people who are on my radar and who I've already been talking to for introducing the new health system to the new West Australian nation. It would be foremost, would have to be Professor Ian Brighthope, because he's a co-author, but he's got the ideas and he's got the education experience and people behind him to be able to implement a much better revamped health and wellness system, not the intolerable health system as it's wrongly called, that currently stretches across the country. And then there'd be the economic advisors, and of course there's straight out of the gate there's my co-authors, Professor Gigi Foster and Michael Baker, and all their colleagues who would come in so enthusiastic. Given the opportunity to make it a reality, we would have such a force of a huge brain trust to ensure that it works. So what's that? 3 people on the team. We've got a human rights component in this book, which is enormous. It's not just, we all suffered from a lack of human rights in COVID. We call it human law under this new constitution. And so no one is beyond, no bureaucrat gets away with any breaches of human rights in the new nation. It's regarded as a criminal offence under the new legislation here. I'd bring in Peter Pham, Australian human rights lawyer who I worked with closely during COVID, and he's known right across the East Coast, particularly for his commentary on the failings of the state and federal government throughout COVID, and they're prepared to do it again. So Peter Pham's right up there. And who would be the 5th then? Gee, so you got to leave a mystery spot for someone, Stephen, because there's always somebody smarter than I know about. So I'll leave that position open.
Very good, mate. I've appreciated it. I wish I could talk to you for another hour. I've got another 100 questions I could ask you, but maybe we can get you back on the show at some point in the future and talk about all this again, because it's as I said, we need a revolution of thinking in this country. We need to start exploring some of these ideas, and then we need to start putting them to the Australian people so they can decide the direction this country needs to go in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
well, let's be clear about that. This isn't a top-down idea. This only becomes a reality if the people choose to make it so. It can only occur via a referendum of the people. And we do not say only WA can do it. We're saying WA can be the first state to show the other states how to do it. And they can take our blueprint and go for their own economic freedom in the manner that they see fit, that's appropriate for their state's value and resources.
Yep. So again, people, please check out the website. A lot of information on the website, secessionwabook.shop. And I encourage you to get a copy of the book. I know I will be. And thank you, Julian, again. And we'll talk soon. So thank you for everyone watching. Please share this one around if you think anyone would be interested. And we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.